It began with a whisper. Then came the screams. The year was 165 AD. Rome was at the height of its glory, an empire stretching from the misty frontiers of Britannia to the sands of Arabia. At its helm stood Marcus Aurelius, the Philosopher Emperor, a man who ruled with wisdom, guided by reason, and armed with a belief in the stoic virtues of duty and honor. But even the greatest of emperors cannot reason with death. The first reports came from Seleucia, a far-off city in Mesopotamia. Soldiers returning victorious from the Parthian wars brought back more than plunder. They carried death in their lungs. The plague had no name, no cure, no mercy. Within weeks, the streets of Roman garrisons ran silent. Soldiers coughed, bled, and collapsed by the hundreds. Then it spread. And finally, Rome itself. Carried by merchants, travelers, and unwitting refugees, the disease crept across the empire like a phantom reaching Antioch. Alexandria, Athens, the eternal city had never known such fear. Everywhere, the same horrors played out, a stench of decay that clung to the living and the dead alike. High fevers, uncontrollable coughing, blackened pustules. Bodies were stacked in the streets, burned in pits when the funeral pyres could no longer keep up. And in the heart of this nightmare, Marcus Aurelius stood alone, watching the empire he had sworn to protect wither before his eyes. Ancient writers claim that 2,000 people died every single day in Rome at the plague's peak. Entire legions were wiped out. Cities turned into graveyards. Trade routes collapsed. Famine followed. Others fled, abandoning homes and families, leaving the sick to die alone. Panic gripped the population. The disease struck him down in 169 AD, leaving Marcus Aurelius to rule a dying empire, haunted by the knowledge that his most trusted companion had been taken by the same unseen killer. Some saw the plague as a punishment from the gods for Rome's hubris. Even the emperor's co-ruler and adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, would not escape its reach. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher who preached calm in the face of fate, was tested like no emperor before him. Would his stoic ideals endure when even the air itself carried death? The Antonine Plague had begun, and Rome would never be the same again. The plague did not relent. It tightened its grip on Rome like a vice, spreading deeper into every corner of the empire. No wall, no legion, no imperial decree could stop it. Marcus Aurelius, already fighting a relentless war against the Germanic tribes along the Danube, now commanded armies ravaged from within. Entire cohorts collapsed before they could meet the enemy, warriors dying not by sword or spear, but by the fever that consumed them. Though for every barbarian slain, 100 Romans fell to the unseen killer. The Germanic tribes, sensing Rome's weakness, pressed harder. Villages burned, frontier towns fell, and the once mighty Roman legions were shadows of their former selves. Marcus Aurelius, torn between duty and survival, had to lead a war with an army that was rotting from the inside. In the cities, the nightmare deepened. Rome's streets, once alive with commerce and laughter, turned to rivers of despair. Citizens locked themselves indoors, fearful that even a breath of air might carry death. Priests filled the temples, begging the gods for mercy. Sacrifices were made, oxen, rams, even rare offerings of gold. But the disease was deaf to prayer. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered of a curse unleashed by the Parthian gods, vengeance for Rome's victories in the east. Others spoke of omens in the sky, comets burning like swords, a warning that the gods had abandoned their empire. And yet, the dead kept coming. The stench of death clung to everything, seeping into the marble halls of the Senate and the gilded walls of the imperial palace. Piles of corpses grew higher each day, burning so constantly that the skies above Rome were blackened with ash. Even the wealthy and powerful, who once believed themselves untouchable, fell victim. Senators, generals, priests, all succumbed. The plague knew no rank, no privilege. Marcus Aurelius refused to abandon his people. He stayed in Rome as much as his duties allowed, writing in his meditations about enduring hardship with virtue, urging himself to meet death with dignity, as nature intended. But his writings were not for others. They were reminders to himself, the private thoughts of a man who saw the empire he had sworn to protect slipping through his fingers. He would not falter. If fate demanded that Rome endure this trial, then he would face it as both emperor and man, even as the world he knew crumbled around him. In the quiet of his tent on the northern frontier, Marcus Aurelius wrote by lamplight, surrounded by death, soldiers coughing in the night, news of cities emptied by plague. He turned inward, penning words that would outlive him. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. They were not words for the empire. They were words for himself. A desperate attempt to hold on to virtue when everything else was being stripped away. The plague had taken his co-emperor Lucius Verus and many of his closest advisors. Even his own children fell ill, their lives hanging by a thread. For Marcus, emperor of the known world, power meant nothing against the invisible hand of fate. He had to rule, to fight, to lead, all while wrestling with his own fear. Yet Rome could not pause. The Marcomannic Wars raged on. Barbarian tribes, sensing Rome's weakness, pushed deeper across the Danube. Town after town fell as Marcus was forced to conscript slaves, gladiators, and even criminals to refill his shattered legions. The armies marched, columns of men weakened by fever, their ranks thinned not by enemy blades, but by the unseen plague that followed them like a shadow. Strange new cults arose, promising protection against the disease. People whispered of Christians, whose gatherings seemed curiously resilient to the plague. Some called them blessed, others blamed them for the empire's suffering. Back in Rome, panic hardened into something darker as death claimed millions. Faith in the old gods wavered. Persecution followed, fueled by fear. When a society trembles, it always searches for someone to blame. Meanwhile, the economy collapsed. Trade faltered, harvests rotted in the fields, and Rome's treasury bled silver to maintain the war effort. For the first time in generations, the invincibility of Rome itself was in question. And through it all, Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, emperor, and reluctant warlord, continued to hold the empire together with nothing but sheer will. His stoicism was not born of indifference. It was born of necessity. He could not save his people from the plague, but he could show them how to face it. In those darkest years, Marcus Aurelius became more than an emperor. He became a symbol of resilience, of quiet strength, of a man who bore the weight of a dying empire and did not turn away. But even the greatest of Rome's emperors could not outrun destiny. When the Antonine Plague finally loosened its grip after 15 relentless years, Rome was not the same empire. An estimated 5 million lives were lost. Soldiers, farmers, merchants, senators, even entire families erased from memory. Some regions never recovered. The once thriving cities of the empire were shadows of their former selves. Fields lay abandoned, trade networks shattered, and the Roman legions, the empire's iron fist, were permanently weakened. For the first time in centuries, Rome's enemies saw her bleed. The economic toll was staggering. Tax revenues collapsed. Emergency levies and forced labor became the norm, deepening unrest among the population. Even Rome's vaunted roads, usually bustling with merchants and travelers, were eerily quiet. But perhaps the most enduring scar was not economic or military. It was psychological. Fear had seeped into the heart of Rome. The sense of divine favor, the belief in the eternal city's invulnerability, was shattered. In this void, new ideas took root. Christianity, once a small and persecuted sect, began to spread rapidly. For many, the Stoic philosophy that Marcus Aurelius himself embodied offered comfort, urging acceptance of fate and resilience in the face of inevitable suffering. Others turned to mysticism and foreign gods, desperate for answers to questions the old religion could not answer. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who had endured so much, would not live to see the full consequences. He died in 180 AD, likely of the very plague that had haunted his reign. With his death, the era of the 5 good emperors came to an end, and Rome entered a new, more turbulent chapter of its history. Historians would later say that the Antonine Plague marked the beginning of Rome's long decline. It weakened the empire's foundations, leaving it vulnerable to the crises and invasions that would one day bring it to its knees. But for those who lived through it, the Antonine Plague was not history. It was a nightmare carved into memory, a time when death became a constant companion and life was measured by days, not decades. And yet, from the ashes of despair came something enduring. The writings of Marcus Aurelius, a man who faced the darkness without flinching and left behind a blueprint for courage. In the face of inevitable loss, the empire survived. But it was never the same again.